You can quickly change a worksheet and perhaps add a little flair simply by changing a font design or the size of a font. The title in cell A1 here is a so-called Broadway font. And of course, we can see in the font group on the Home tab the current font being used. Cell A3, for example, uses the default in Excel, the Calibri font. Recognize that when we do click on cell A1, we see this choice. And with the drop arrow, we can certainly explore quite a few others. And as we slide over these, we're not clicking, of course, we can see quite a few different choices and see them as they will appear on the worksheet. This could be a real time waster if you're not careful. There's just so many choices out here. And again, you use the choices that fit your particular needs. Easy and fast changes there for sure. And the color of them can be changed just as easily with the drop arrow that's to the right of the font color button. And here and there we slide across different choices. And with white backgrounds, generally we want to choose a darker color for readability purposes, like this one, for example. And there will be times when we want to change multiple cells. Of course, just hide a few cells. And again, explore some of those many options. If these colors are not the ones that you want, you might want to explore using different themes or possibly click the More Colors option. And you've got 127 color choices here, along with some blacks and grays as well. If you would like all of these to revert to the more or less standard font colors, then there is a choice you may have seen there with the drop arrow called Automatic. And it simply uses the black standard background there. I would strongly suggest that you not change the colors of numerical cells, particularly in accounting environments, because there are standard techniques there for making negatives appear in red automatically. And although it may be a little bit of trivia, in Excel 2010 and Excel 2007, the standard font is Calibri size 11. In prior versions, it was Arial size 10. And as we look at the two next to each other here, they certainly look very, very similar in style. Slight difference here and there. A small point, but one that could be confusing. This cell here actually is size 12. We see that by looking within the font group here. We see it's 12. This is 11. But when you do highlight a cluster of cells and you're wondering which font is being used and what size is being used, you could make the mistake of saying, well, it looks like they're all, what, Calibri 11? Well, that is the size of the active cell, but the others are not necessarily that. And so by changing this, of course, we are saying make them all be 11. And of course, this one now is 11 as well, too. If you do want to save a little bit of ink here for printing purposes, you might use a different font called Century, and you'll find it in the list here, too. And somebody did some research on this. Well, if you want to use 20% less ink, use this particular format. So there are quite a few different formats to be sure. The sizes are easy to get to. And we're talking about those easy to reach buttons in the font group on the Home tab. The most important one is for changing the font color, if that's your focus, or the actual font itself or the numbers, all together here on that font group. In this particular worksheet called Custom Font Colors, you'll recognize that in column A, we do have numbers there with different colors, but there's something a little different going on here. I'm going to click on one of these, for example, the cell A2. Maybe I want to make this one green. If I click the font button here, as I slide over these, we're not seeing any changes at all. So something's a little unusual here. What's happening? Primarily for historical reasons, but something that you might encounter anyway, and something that you could possibly use, there is a way to apply formats by way of a custom format. By simply selecting one of the cells and right-clicking and going to Format Cells, you're going to see something unusual, a special custom format. And this is a little harder to read here, so what I'm going to do is simply drag across it and press Control-C and cancel, and then display this a bit larger right here. Space Control-V. The format that's being used in column A, and by inference you can figure out what it's now doing, says the following. If any cell in here is greater than or equal to 80, it's going to be blue. The double zero happens to relate to the particular format, two numerical entries. Magenta is being used for those that are greater than or equal to 70. And of course that means those that are below 80 at the same time. So the logic is inclusive as we move from left to right. So the blues are the 80 and above. The magentas are those that are 70 up through, but just short of 80. And the greens are all the others. And we see how it's being used. Now, with some of the expanded conditional formatting capability that you will have available in Excel 2010 as well as in Excel 2007, these are less frequently used, but in older worksheets, you still might see them. They're still viable and they still work. And it does provide a different way of providing custom formatting for fonts based on numerical entries. The colors that can be used within the brackets are listed right here in column C. Those are the only choices you have available. You can certainly use other kinds of logic here using the arrows and the equal to sign. But again, primarily for historical reasons and the fact that you may encounter them, a way to use custom formats to apply colors within a worksheet. In addition to changing the color of a font or the actual font design, there are other buttons in the font group on the Home tab that we might explore also. Certainly every Excel user knows how to use bold and italic, easy on-off toggle buttons. Recognize that for underlining, which we might want to do for these three cells, there certainly is the U. A lot of people have used that. You may not have tried the other variation available on the drop-down called double underline. If you look to the right, you'll notice another reference here, and you wouldn't necessarily know until you see that there's a third and even a fourth kind of underlining available in the Format Cells dialog box. You can see these two side by side, see the difference, the word single and then single accounting. Notice how the line appears with the data, and we also see it in column G. And if you are interested in these variations, let's suppose we want to experiment with this a little bit. We could certainly right-click and jump right into Format Cells. You can also get here by way of Control-Shift-F. And in the underline section in the middle on the left-hand side here, we do see the differences. The previews here pretty much tell the story as well, too. Single, as the preview shows, puts the line pretty close to the data compared with single accounting, which moves the line farther away from the information. So use that as necessary, but they're easy to get to. And here we see the two examples of double and double accounting in these two sets of cells here. Another possible use for the Format Cells dialog box is if you need to use a superscript, for example, the number 2 here to make it display the way we see this in column H, or 2 as a subscript as an H2O the way we see it here. And simply in these cases, highlight the data in question. Perhaps this time we could just press Control-Shift-F, another way to get in there, into that same dialog box. In this case, for the example here, we want to use superscript. Click OK, and the 2 looks like that. And of course here, similarly, we want this to be a subscript. Control-Shift-F, we can do it that way, and use subscript. And a different feature that's also here is something called strikethrough. You see how it's being used here. And once again, different ways to get there, but Format Cells, here's the strikethrough option. It's a toggle on-off. We're taking it off. We could just as easily have put it on. I'm going to highlight these cells because I want to apply strikethrough. Control-5 is the keystroke shortcut, and that is a toggle shortcut, so Control-5 will remove this. I suppose if you think that 5 sort of looks like an S, maybe that'll help you remember this. I use this more than I thought I would have when I discovered it a few years ago, but it too is one of those choices available when we enter the Format Cells dialog box. We've talked about subscript, superscript, strikethrough, and the various underlining choices that are available here as well. In this worksheet, you can see a variety of different border styles being applied to make the data offset, stand out a bit. You'll also notice that the grid lines have been turned off. If you are going to apply borders, as we see, for example, in columns B and C, over in column E, probably it shows up a bit better if we're not seeing the grid lines. Remember, you can click the View tab and add or take off grid lines throughout the entire worksheet. It's an on-off button. It's grid lines. And we'll show you the difference in a second here. Now, suppose I want to put a border on these cells here. Right-click, Format Cells, and don't always count on the border tab having been active. It depends on what you've done recently, but if it isn't, click the border tab. Now, possibly when you're adding borders, you might want to consider color. So you might start with that feature first. You don't necessarily do that one first. Maybe we want an orange color here, and then you pick a border style. Do you want a thick line, a double line, some other variation here? Do you want this border just on the perimeter, as it might look here, or do you want it on the inside cells as well? So possibly there. I doubt if you're going to use this one very often. You might not. You can also click the various components in this display area here too. For example, if I click the one on the right, I wouldn't really want to proceed with that, but that's a possibility, or click it again, and here and there, depending upon what's being outlined, sometimes you want to consider that variation as well. So as we click OK here, we'll see some changes. And again, it's always a good idea once you've applied changes, click outside of it. Here it's pretty clear what's going on, but you might want to turn off the grid lines anyway. It accentuates what we've done here more clearly. If there's a particular set of cells where you simply want to put a simple border on, suppose on these cells here, there is a keystroke shortcut, Control-Shift-Ampersand, above the number 7 key, puts a simple border around the highlighted cells. Again, click outside of the area to see what's happened. If you would like to get rid of borders, maybe you've decided these borders here just don't serve much purpose, maybe, and there are two different kinds here as well. highlight all of these, keystroke shortcut, Control Shift _, and that removes all borders within the selected area. Now there's also a way to draw a grid. You see the grids here. You can actually draw these if you wish. It does mean resurrecting a feature out of Excel's past. If you right-click anywhere in the Quick Access toolbar, you can choose Customize Quick Access Toolbar and choose Commands From, choose All Commands. And in this choice here, we'll see a number of draw border features. And you might want to experiment with some of the different ones, but I'm going to use the last one here, which is called Draw Borders. Add, click OK. Now, you might later remove this from the Quick Access toolbar so because you don't use it very often. You certainly have that option. I want to use it now, so I'm going to click this button, and I might want to consider just a simple, maybe I'll use this dash line here. I want to use the dash line, and I could add color, so I'll click this again. This isn't exactly the fastest way. Maybe use a dark green here. And then I'll come back a third time possibly to do what? Either I'm about to draw just an outer border or maybe a border grid. And down here, I want to draw a border grid starting at this point. So come back up here, choose Draw Border Grid. It activates the pointer. Notice the dots in the worksheet as well. I want to grid over this section right here. By pressing Escape, those other dots that we see out here will disappear. So you can either draw a grid as I did here or the other approach. Now, it does take a little longer to have to constantly go back and forth to that particular tool. So that may not be something you'll use that often, but there is a way to do that as well. I think if you get used to the standard way of doing this, it's going to work pretty smoothly for most people. And again, a reminder, you can quickly get into format cells a variety of ways. Control-1 is another way. Activate this particular dialog box, and if border isn't selected, select it, and then pursue some of the options that we saw earlier within this particular dialog box. You can clearly see in this worksheet that cells have been colored, color backgrounds have been added, but you might not know, but you might be seeing for the first time here, that you can also use patterns within cells. And many times these are not a great idea. I think I wouldn't make a strong case for saying this is a great feature, but here and there it's going to make some sense. And you might also occasionally want to use lines like this to separate data. In other words, put them into an empty row. Let's just show how we can do this here. Maybe we want to either change this or make a different pattern. Let's begin by right-clicking and jumping right into Format Cells. And for the highlighted area, we want to click the Fill tab. We see colors here, pattern styles listed here. Click the drop arrow, and I think you'll see almost immediately if we use a choice like this, thin horizontal crosshairs, you see what this is likely to be. You can apply a color along with that at the same time. Let's say that wouldn't be a very good choice for any cells that have data that you're trying to read. So the better choice here might be one that has a very skimpy dot display this way, or possibly this one a little denser. You will have to experiment with this a little bit. The pattern color itself, would you want that to be a different color? Now we have red dots instead of black dots. So you can even go that far if you wish. So we're going to change the look of this by using a slightly different pattern style, slightly denser use of dots, and a color as well. That's the color of the dots. Click OK. And you see the difference. And I'll press Control-Z to remind you how that did look, and I'll press Control-Y to go back and forth. Back again. So different approaches there. Over here is something a little bit fanciful, sort of show-offy. Really, I don't think too many people would use this, but same location here. Right-click Format Cells, and here what we would use possibly is Fill Effects. And you can see the two colors here that have been used. See them in the background. Of course, you got tons of choices here. You could waste a lot of time on this one, couldn't you? There's green and yellow. It's actually being used in the previous example. So how about some different colors here? Some greens and blues. You mix them different ways. Decide how you want them to look here. Maybe it's this one, maybe that one. You can even do diagonally. I think you could waste a lot of time here, couldn't you? How about these? Click OK. Green on top and bottom, bluish in the center. There we go. So you have that look, one by one. So just fast, easy ways to change the look of certain worksheets. And here and there, perhaps it adds a light touch to the worksheet or just makes it a little bit more interesting. But you can add patterns to cells as well as colors.